and there's a sense in which you know how you can be on God's good books and you end up in heaven kind of a thing. I think it's in the living that is very complicated. Honestly, I don't think we know what to do with God when we are living. Does he exist to bless us? Does he exist to correct us?
That's bringing that to your awareness that a lot of what you understand God as is imagery. And however that imagery is for you, that is very defining on how you live out even this your Christian faith.
Literally, we are in a country where people for whatever reason are convinced to fast themselves to death. Because that's one of the ways that you increase this beauty of God.
Welcome to the season finale of this season of the ReImagine podcast. We're so glad that you have made it this far. If you have made it this far, if this is the first time you're seeing this podcast, Karibu Sana, we have done a whole season and we're excited that you have come along with us. So, to finish this season in true OG fashion, we are going to be reimagining God. The Father, the person,
reimagining God,
the one, the only. And to start us off as usual is a quote by Father Richard Rohr, who says this about God: your image of God creates you or defeats you. There is an absolute connection between how we see God and how we see ourselves and the universe.
That's
end of the episode.
That's only for
good night.
Only Richard Rohr can say that and mean it.
Oh, he means it.
The rest of us read it and you're like, sounds nice.
Must be good.
Sounds, yeah, but it's true to all degrees. I think my first thought is just, and I think everyone has this image of God as a retributive father. I don't know how that narrative started. So we live our lives in fear of a retributive father because that's the image that has been, embedded in us, encapsulated in us, and all of those things. So if you carry that image, you will live in a way that reflects that image all through your life. And I'm sure all of you know stories of people who have held that story, that belief, that kind of thing. I have held that story, that belief, that kind of thing. We were talking about salvation in the previous episode, and it seems like that's one of the easiest ways to get people to come to this our side, to the good news, if you tell them some version of a retributive God, because that's fear. That fear can create obedience. So we use that to create disobedience and all of that. So we have a generation of all of us Christians, everyone who has some sort of image of a retributive God, and our lives reflect that.
Yeah, and also we also, I think, central, and the first is like, it's very true what Richard was saying.
Yes.
And yet it's like so true. It's shocking how often we reflect on that, like the idea that the way I'm living my life is a reflection of this image I carry in my head, It's like most of the times we want to pretend that the way we live our lives is but it's a choice I made, Turns out that choice is being informed by the idea of God, as it were. And if it's that powerful, I'm like, what do we not? How is it that we don't talk about this often? But I think in light of a retributive God also, we carry around also for the Christmas sort of nice God. Even in a culture where we don't do gifts, there's still a sense in which it's either a retributive God who is angry, but also there's also a God who dishes out blessings. You know what I mean? So if you're in good behavior, he dishes out blessings. If you misbehave, of course, he chapas you kiboko, dharari, as it were. And it's so funny because we don't think of how being stuck with such a bipolar understanding of a creator of the universe. I mean, it's true, right? It's like you are forever walking on thin ice, you know what I mean? Because then, is he not blessing me because I've done something off in my life, you know? Oh, but now he has blessed me. That means I must be in his good books. Okay, the question is, how do I sustain this being on his good books? You know what I mean? It's like, it's...
And there's also a suspect between the definition of blessing.
Exactly, that whole thing, right? So it's like the whole, is it, yeah, so then you have this, and then, oh my God, and then what do you do with the moments of life which are painful and suffering, like, you know? Is that God punishing you or not? You know what I mean? And then, of course, we also carry the idea that God loves us, you know? So, I mean, I'm just saying, like, once you mix and match all these things, forget the thinking on how you think of God. Think of how that understanding of that God creates us, you know? So, like, then we are left to be people who don't know what to do with your faith. I mean, honestly, it's no wonder that our faith is very oriented on going to heaven thing. I think that there's a clarity there, and there's a sense in which you know how you can be on God's good books, and you end up in heaven, kind of a thing. I think it's in the living that is very complicated. Honestly, I don't think we know what to do with God when we are living. You know, does he exist to bless us? Does he exist to correct us? Is he happy with us? Is his happiness something that is beheld on us? You know what I mean? Like the drunk dad who insists on the children entertaining him, you know?
That's like, okay.
Always no nice dads. Get drunk and then get lost on the ditches.
Yeah.
So yes, that's the things that comes to mind.
Yeah, I think for me it's just from this quote, it's as an emphasis on the fact that most of what we have of God is just images, because we don't have like a very tangible thing about, like you see, like Jesus is like a personified person. Like it's like we see his stories, we hear his words, he's interacting with other people. I think after we leave God in Genesis, he becomes like a person. We have to create our ideas about who he is because we are not seeing his personification. I think it's so cool that, like, for me, it's just that bringing that to your awareness that a lot of what you understand God as is imagery. And however that imagery is for you, that is very defining on how you live out even this your Christian faith. Like it's not an unbiased thing. It's not a thing that's like, oh, he could be a father or he could be a whatever. Like whatever it is that you consider God as will truly define you in very big ways. Whether you're a person of faith or not, to be honest. Even if for you God is you can still end up orienting your life around that. It still like defines a lot of your life. You know, you could even make a career out of it.
Especially that.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. So I think that image thing, it's so important.
And the lack of image for God, as you're saying, like throughout the Old Testament, he has always shown up as different things. The stories of the people, he shows up as a cloud, he shows up as a fire, he shows up as all these different things that, in a sense, you really can't relate to. So now it complicates the story even further because now you don't have an image as your reference point as this person.
There's no one consistent.
There's no one consistent thing of this person who is the creator of all, who is the source of life and all those things that you describe him. So we have descriptions to go with, but these descriptions are not necessarily even connected. In a sense, so you don't have an image to quote unquote guide you.
No, which is a very fascinating. I mean, even with Richard Ross' statement, like we read that and we see and get a sense of it. But also it's challenging in itself, right? Because it's also God who says, is it, you shall not make an idol, or in one of the commandments. Right? Basically, you shall not seek to particularize me as one thing.
That's one thing, yes.
Right? So I'm not like a piece of wood that you carve and has ears or whatever. And then I wonder to what degree that image extends to the mental image that we create of God. You know what I mean? So in a sense, there is wisdom in what God is saying. Like, don't any attempt to reduce me to something will actually malform you in a very real sense. You know, so there's that nuance to it, and I think that's why in the Old Testament, then it's that you at the end you carry a sense of presence, right? You carry a sense of presence in that sense. But presence is really hard to articulate. And so I think the goal, I think, even with Richard Rowe, is not to end up with a very particularized image of God, because then that becomes an idol, and that idol is not God. You know, there's even this proverb: is it lean not on your own understanding, trust in God. You know, your ways. You know, like this idea that you can lean on your understanding, and then that makes an idol. You know, which I think is a problem that God has with the freedom He has given us. You know what I mean? Like, I've created you, so there's a sense in which you can never fully know me. And yet, still, because I've created you, I'm very essential to how you live your life. So then you have to go around reimagining and imagining me in all sorts of ways. So then it's like, okay, but then I don't want also that to become an idol. Like, okay, God, what are we to do? You know, and then you have given us this creative image. Actually, it's the only way we know how to relate to God, sort of making sacrifices, you know. And then the other point that I wanted to also raise is that when we talked about the scriptures, and we talked about these inherited interpretations that we don't even bring to mind, I think this is one of the areas that impact us the most. You know, where did we get the idea of retributive God?
Yes.
Right? It's a particular interpretation that just exists in society. We just imbibe it.
It makes sense for a particular people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it actually maybe was used to mobilize people towards a particular goal or whatever it is, right? And then now we just live with it. You know what I mean? So then the idea that to the degree that the image you have of God makes or defeats you, then whoever mediates that image becomes a very big deal. I mean, literally, we are in a country where people, for whatever reason, are convinced to fast themselves to death, because that's one of the ways that you would praise this retributive God. You know, and it's that but whoever you allow to mediate your idea of God, then becomes very, very essential. Which is now back to what we were saying about the reimagining of the Bible. Those things like really do matter, you know, in that sense. Anyway.
Because the mediators have a lot of say, because as a people we've put these mediators on some sort of pedestal. So they continually define for us this image of God that we need to please. And there's these particular ways in which you can please this God.
Exactly.
So now with all of that, so what are we talking about when we are talking about God?
Wow.
The
OG.
What are we talking about when we talk about God?
No, actually, even with our conversation, like when again it started by saying, actually, like with Jesus, we know he was a person and everything else, right? And there's a sense in which even that is complex, right? Because within our Christian faith, when we talk of God, we're talking of God in three persons. So in a very real sense, we may have a problem with God the Father, but then somehow we also discount God the Son as not being a part of that. You know what I mean? Because the guy was ordinary, like one died on whatever the thing is. And then of course God the Holy Spirit, right? So even God himself like sets himself out to be a tripping game. Still back to the Old Testament thing. Like he's like working very hard for you not to like pin me down, kind of a thing. Which leads us to this whole idea of God existing at a mystical mystery level. and we have problems with that.
We do.
Yeah, I think that we want something we can name and we can, whatever the thing is, But then the God we have, and so what do we talk about when we talk about God? First and foremost is that we talk about God, at least in a particular Christian faith, as God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, as one. Distinct people, but as one. Most of the times when literally we even say God, which means God the Father. You know what I mean? And which yeah, let me stop. So many thoughts in my head for people.
They don't want to come.
Yeah. Episode finale.
Yeah, season finale. Bring it all.
Mm.
What do we think? I don't know what to talk about when we talk about God. Because every time I think about it, it's like this. Even God Himself through Scripture, there's so many different descriptions of God. It's like, yeah. So, wow, is it all of these things? Is it then we're like, how do anyway? Yeah. But I think something interesting about it is one of the big ones. One of the I guess for me the core descriptions of God is God being love. God is love. It's like so simple, so whatever. But then, what does that even mean? Because it's not like I figured out what love is. Because even that is something we need to struggle with and figure out, like, what truly is love, what is not love. And there's all these, and I think the thing with, for example, so let me talk about love in that juxtaposition of those two things, is that we've allowed that thing, this concept of love, to be defined and described by so many people. Like it's almost the one thing we've given permission to everyone to describe and define in their own experience, Artists, songwriters, poets, whatever, whoever. Like it's like love is the thing that we are just like, yeah, like I get it. I like when you're I will not write poetry, I can't write poetry, but when I hear what you're saying, I get what you're talking about, and I can even validate your experience. So yeah, I think when I'm thinking about, like, even what we are talking about when we talk about God, one of the things that strikes me is how little permission we have to describe and define God. Even though it feels like in the Bible people had that permission, like people had, like, people just random people were naming God, calling just all these people who are calling and naming God. So yeah, for me, I'm just like, I don't know. It's like God ends up being, I guess what Nash is saying here, transcendent of any one image that we could make of Him. Even we are saying Him, but also at the same time very particularly expressed for individuals. Like,
before it comes, it's because I think what you're saying is like so powerful. It's like even in the scriptures we get people getting permission sort of to name God, which is like to particularize God in how He has showed up. Right? God by Ebenezer or Elohim or all most of those different things. But those are descriptors of how God has showed up. Like it's naming God by how God has showed up for us, as compared to saying, I think we run into the problem where then we universalize that, you know what I mean? Because God showed up in this particular place and then the person there said, oh, God is like my Ebenezer kind of a thing. Then God is Ebenezer. You know what I mean? And everybody will keep perpetuating this idea for He is Ebenezer, or the kind of a thing, right? And then one of the challenges we have with that is even the using of the article He, hope we don't get into all sorts of problems. But like, not to dramatize it really, but it's like God is not a He or a She, or technically not a them. We cover all the bases, all of those things, right? But then we are finite beings. These people were created by God and given permission to still name Him. So whatever we are in our limitedness, we still get to name Him in one way or another, still being aware that whatever our naming is at its best a language limitation, number one.
Yeah.
But then the other thing is how best we get to even wrap our minds around God is through metaphors. You know, was it someone who said metaphors are true because they are infinitely true. Like you can keep getting layers and layers and layers of truth out of that metaphor. And all we get for God, I guess, is like genuine metaphor. Yet and still, if you listen to especially how we talk about God, I kid you not, it could feel like this is the equivalent of a roommate. Like this particularization has become so, and God is personal. It can be personal. I mean, like we read that in David, as it were. But it can be personal almost to the exclusion of he's also transcendence. The same way that he can be transcendent in a way that he is not personal. It's like God is like it's running around, dancing around everything.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, even in the question itself, here trying to define God in a sense is we are trying to put God in some sort of a container to contain him and or her or them or so and one of the definitions, and it's even how the Lord's Prayer starts, our Father who art in heaven. But then you encounter people who have had problems with their fathers here in more hurtful ways, and then they can't connect to God because of that, and you can't invalidate their views about God if you insist on defining God as a father and all of that. So even Jesus teaching his disciples that it's just one of the expressions of many, but if we focus and we do a good job at defining him, it's still a container we've put him in that we don't necessarily need to put him, because I mean, again, back to Richard Rohr, he says elsewhere that one of our goals in life should be to continually expand our containers of God. So we can come from whichever narrow definition of God we have, the retributive father or the guy in the sky or whatever, as narrow as it is. So your goal in life as you mature in your faith, in your Christianity, should be to continually expand that container so that we can have as many descriptions, as many definitions of him, depending on how he has shown up in our different places. He has shown up as a silent voice, he has shown up as thunder, he has shown up as fire, he has shown up as all those things. So expanding our containers, even in that sense.
And I think it's still important to say, because like this God is like so unique, which is also to say that he still sets himself up as a knowable God. Right? You can know him. It's just that we equate knowing with boxing. You know what I mean? Like, so, and it also, I think we say that with God as if it's not true of human beings. You know what I mean? Like, I know my wife, and she still is a knowable, which is why I hope I get married to her for a lot of years. So, like, we meet us after 100 years of marriage, and I'm like, oh God, I know. You know what I mean? It's the sense of endless knowing, not just with God, but with human beings. Exactly, So there's a sense in which it's just not complex. That's not what we are saying, that God is so complex you can't figure him out. It's like he sets himself up in a way that you can know him, and yet be aware that it's an endless, unlimited knowing that exists. Still, the challenge for me is that we know him a bit like this, and then we want to go around into the world and say, this is God, like in this container. So that's like the big challenge. And then like number two, because of especially this God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit thing is like complex, and I think almost God, the theologians tell us, almost was aware of how much we struggle with this God the Father part and how he shows up in the world. It's why he literally becomes one of us. That's how Jesus shows up into the world. Almost saying, if you ever wonder who I am as a God, this is who I am. In this particularized person, which raises all sorts of nice, complex, beautiful things. that this God reduces himself to be a child so that we can get to know him and touch him and get a feel for him, right? And not only that, also point to us what it looks like for God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit to be in a relationship, kind of a thing. It's like then Jesus just there really at the core as a model, which is something we lose all around because we tend to center a lot on Jesus' death on the cross. So we miss out all these other things. But if you're to ask me what we talk about God, I'll say we look at Jesus. Like, who is he? How does he live? And again, he is knowable and still endlessly unknowable in that sense. So like those ones.
One of the easiest ways to talk about that, even in particular ways for us, is how even our different seasons of life call or even demand for a different God. The seasons when you're just like, I don't know, you need a provider. Sometimes you need a comforter. Sometimes and we. It's funny how we don't have a problem with that. Like, it's just like, this is who, even though you don't articulate it like that, it's that like the God you're seeking in this season of your life is this God needs to show up to you in this particular way. But then how is it that then still it becomes such a small thing when it keeps evolving in your everyday, even in your prayers, and even how you reach out, how you pray, and how you talk to God, as we say. It changes. So, which also means that then this God has to be quite expansive.
Exactly.
If in every season there's a way for you to reach out and almost demand that he becomes a certain thing for you.
In particular.
Yeah, so I don't know. We are talking about an expanding God. So just wondering how has or what are some of the moments that have led to you or forced you to expand your vision of God?
Wow. And
Do you want us to be here? Or do you want us to go home?
No, and I think it's still an important thing, even what Agi is saying. It's even not so much of an expanding God. It's a ever-expanding view of him, And then, of course, as he expands, it seems bigger, but he has always been bigger. You know what I mean? He's just the one catching up with just a little bit more of inches, I think, and this maybe allows me to bring into the other way of understanding God, which we don't talk a lot in our circles, which is to say, theologians, again, philosophers, whoever those bright people are, there is like we do, because of this expansive mystical God we have. It's like two sort of ways of even getting to know him. Right? And one of them is through like words, like we're saying, like God the provider, God all these things. And then they still go on and say there's still another way of knowing God that is beyond the words. It's not about the words now. Like you know God even in the absence of articulatable words. This is, again, keeps drawing us into the deep end of chaos. You know what I mean? And I think that again we missed that. But I just remember, for me, like there was a time my daughter got a heat stroke. I guess it's best way, or a fever stroke. So she passed out, and we had to like rush her to hospital and all these things, and all my fears came crashing, right? And I don't think like you'd imagine that I would run towards at that time, and like cry that God be this person or be this and whatever. I was just wordless, there's no praying, you know what I mean? And yet in this lack of words, there was still a feeling, like a feeling like the way you feel water, just kind of a thing. It's a fullness of an engulfing, almost like with a God that I don't think I'll ever articulate. Again, the best way the closest I come to that is a presence, And that presence sort of calmed me down enough to say, like, oh, I don't even need to pray. You know what I mean? Not like I don't need to pray, like, worried anymore. But it's in the thick of these things, like I've been pushed to the limit of what I know to do or not to do. And then I find myself being carried by a presence beyond or at the limit of all my caring, So that for me, it's like all of a sudden I feel like I've been reintroduced to a completely different God. You know what I mean? It's like, I know God the provider, the healer, and all those things.
This is God, the one who is closer than a brother.
Yeah, that's it. Well, no, they put it even want to talk closer like a brother. Right?
No, Dan, it's like with the but like,
yeah,
what does that mean, closer than a brother?
I mean, it depends on how claustrophobic you feel. That to be inspired, you know, like, okay. No, but it's like being lifted up and being caught up in a God that you haven't even met yet.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you knew God has provided and delivered, and He has done all these crazy things. And then there's this moment when you thought you knew God, and you even know what to expect of Him, and He just sort of figures out, like, this one is for being carried. So then, now I come out of this moment, like, my daughter is fine, she's going home, or that kind of a thing, you know? And that memory doesn't go anywhere. You know, it's almost now, it's part of my vocabulary when I try to say who God is to me. You know, God is still the presence that carries me when I've come to the end of myself. You know?
It's true. It was a question.
Moments that have forced you to expand your containers of
like
God.
my whole life.
Yeah.
Like,
My whole life has been one big moment.
one big moment of like, how big can this God get? Because I got a lot of issues. Yeah, I don't know. Like, there's been so many moments. I'm even wondering which one would be the moment.
It's like also be a parent and to have to. It's like the teaching.
It's just like, oh my God.
What are you grateful for? My children.
My children, my husband, my wife. It's like us.
This gives me a lot of joy to see the rest of his
friends, my radio, my company, my companions when I'm at home. I think one of those moments, and I think it's more closely tied to Nash's theme of that presence, that beyond words, that God that's beyond words, or that God that's, it's almost like, for me, it's almost like a reassuring presence. It's like, I'm here. Was in 2020 when my grandma died, and it's lockdown, and it's just, what is that? Like, but I just want to go and bury my grandmother. I can't go. What do you mean I can't go? Like, it's such a weird thing. I have to go. And me, I'm just like, I have to go. So I don't know how you'll work this out, but I just know I'm going to be in Kisumu in a day. Because also you need to bury in like 2 days. It's just weird. And that was one of those moments that it was like a whole week of blah. Just like, I don't even know how I ended up, anyway, I broke the law, but how I ended up getting there and and eventually being there. And I always thought that, like, when I was younger, I really was scared of like, people have died, like someone has died and they're there, and you see the way people used to sit next to the casket, or like people still do it, and they're just there, like, this is like they're still kind of talking, or I used to find that like a bit woo, like, oh my gosh, like, just let them go or something. It used to scare me. Let me just say, that idea of like you can sit next to a casket used to scare me. But like when my grandma died and I got home and she was put in her dress, and we were just outside her room, and she was dressed, because everything is happening in like 48 hours. So everything is happening really fast, but there's like such moments of pause. It's just like, I remember when we were standing outside as she was being dressed. I remember when her casket was being brought out, and then I remember this moment of just being next to her casket, and it was open, and I just sat there for like a while. Before this is when the service was, we come from hospital into the church, and I'm just sitting there. And I would never have done that. Like, I even think she's the first person who I've sat that close to. And just looked at her, and she was there, and I don't know, it was like a really, my woo-woo moment, you know, that kind of thing. But it was
you weren't wrong even as a child.
No.
Woo-woo moment.
Yeah. Sister Lord, you know, it's a moment. But it's truly a moment, and it's a God moment. For me, it's one of those things that's like people talk about, like, oh my gosh, she was just so peaceful. So, but I could still feel the energy of it, just who she was. Like that thing, like this woman of valor and faith and all of these things, who has carried an entire generation, you know. Yeah, that was a truly, truly God moment. Yeah.
I think even for me, my expansion through the years, I mean, as all of us just started from the retributive father with a beard, you know, up in the sky.
Does he have like gold? Like, I don't know why, like, it's like he's also so rich. Like,
Yeah, he has
golden robes and
1,000 cattle on 1,000.
No, you never imagine him with cows.
I don't see the cows. The cows are in the backyard. Somewhere outside
If you have
of
that
his...
many cows, you clearly have that many workers.
Yeah, outside of his purview, because his purview is also quite holy. We can't be having cows running out.
Yeah, so, coming from, you know, a retributive God, and I guess there is a season where that worked for my, you know, infancy stage of faith and all of that, and continuing that to get to a point of the things they threatened me with so that I can obey this person are no longer threatening.
Oh,
you know those things. I have this brother that, you know, used to threaten him, if you don't wash the utensils, you are not eating supper. And then he tells you, okay, that's fine.
I don't want to eat.
Just like you run out of threats. And the dishes are still there.
They're still there.
Yeah, so we go to a point where, like, the threats are no longer, you know, severe or whatever. Yeah. So now that forces you to another expansion of God. So what can God be in this season? And I think, as you just said, for the most part, this love, this presence that you guys are talking about has been constant. But within those, you experience very particular things in different seasons. And I've also had seasons where God met me at the end of my words. It's like, now I don't have words. God has been there. You feel whatever the peace, the presence, the being carried, and all of that. So different seasons have, you know, moved me, forced me to define God differently, and that has really been helpful to how my faith has grown, how I view Him, how I reflect Him, or whatever that means, and all of that.
And also, I think connected to that, of course, like we seem like all of us settled on the sustaining presence, as it were. But also I've had like very clear moments of like this God speaking to me, you know. So again, back to, I dance between this mystical presence and this still very particular voice talking to you. You know what I mean? And just to see that, to say, like, of course, there's a lot of, again, woo nonsense of people using God's voice for manipulating purposes. But I think to some degree they use that because it's also very true. You know what I mean? Like in moments, I mean, I can remember like the house where we are currently staying in, and it came after, I don't know, like almost like 9 months of like searching for a house. I mean, my wife searching for a house and me praying. But with increasing desperation, you know, we're expecting this baby to come, so we needed a bigger space, you know. And I kid you, like there's this place where I was walking, and they are building these gated communities, whatever. And it's like, I don't know, we're trying to get a home there or something. And I just stood there, and as I was like walking, just looking, you know, like longing for like, as in, is it so hard to just get a house, you know? I remember clearly hearing God say, you know, I have a home for you. Like, I have a home for you. Of course, like most of them just come across like with a mild rebuke at the back. Like, I can't believe this is stressing you. But in a very real sense, I got this idea that I have a house for you. And no kidding, like however many months later, we got a home right across, like where I first heard that God's voice, in the strangest of strange places. Like we'd never have found it if we went looking, whatever the thing is. And that home has ended up serving us in ways that we couldn't even have imagined to ourselves. You know what I mean? So like there's a sense in which, and I guess in that moment then it's like it's a God who I can name, you know what I mean? The God, the provider, the God, the comforter for me, So yeah, so there's still those things for voices. And I guess you can get into all sort of cheesy sort of like, how does the voice sound like? I don't know. Like the cloud pattern. Those are damn involved,
So there's just this theme of voice. Mine wasn't particularly a voice. Those things you are doing, some training and all of that. Then a prayer session thing. Long ago. That's like so.
When you used to pray.
I know, right? And then it was, so we are praying for Africa. We are serious, like we finished the problems in Kenya. Africa. Now we are into Africa.
Yes,
so everyone pick a country, write it down, and then commit to pray for that country. And I was like,
that's what we are doing.
Yeah, that's what I guess. Yeah, guess which country I picked.
Malawi.
Yeah. Yeah, and
then how many more months later or years later were you there to find yourself?
3-4 years later. And I had forgotten this moment, and then one time just going through my journal, I'm like, wait a minute.
I did pray for Malawi.
I did say I'll pray for this country, so maybe I didn't pray enough.
Now you're being
so
sent.
God was just like, no,
This is
you
your
go and
journal
do the
moment.
work. You go do the work in Malawi. So just remember that story as you're saying this story about the voice and all.
Oh, it's very it's still to you because like I still remember. I don't even know which episode it was that we were talking about. I mean, because we were talking about the sustaining presence, the voices, but also there is the tangible experiences, right? Like you are saying about hiking when it was raining and whatnot, and I found that to be so particular. Like, even like the various circumstances being curated in some supernatural way to just speak to you, like remind you this idea that you belong, seen or whatever it is.
So I'm hearing all of all of this, and it seems that we are forced to expand our containers of God mostly in moments of pain, in moments where we are searching and seeking for things. But then also there is a danger in which we can, misrepresent God in those moments, or want God to show up so much for us that we can create our own stories about, that whole thing. About just like, but God is there. So as to avoid the pain, for example. You're just like, so we say, especially as Christians, we say things like, but God knows. But you're just like, no, he doesn't.
I'm very sure of that. He does not know this one.
So I'm wondering where is that line, and how do we navigate such a line for God is real in these moments, but there is also moments where we can want him so bad that we bypass whatever it is that we are going through.
That's a lot.
There's a last episode. It's coming with a lot.
It's too much, but also it's God. It's God.
We can't reimagine.
We can't.
45 minutes.
It's also God. I mean, I don't know. It's like what's coming to my mind is this idea that I think a while ago we were talking about a church. I don't even remember, but this idea of remembering, that was very core to the Israelites' journey, in their own expansion and knowing of God. Remembering where He had brought them from was such a core part of what their faith and their relationship with this God was about. And I guess that's also true for us. It's like when we remember all these particular moments of God being with us, it's almost like we're like, there's an assurance that comes with. But also, it's also true that when I'm in the thick of it, actually the last thing I want to do is remember how you did it that time, because now I need it now. Now, your time matter, what are your urgency at that time? Now, today is the day that I need you to come through for me. So there's a tendency to forget. But also, it's complex. I think it's quite layered. It's like in my moment of this need, whatever that need is, whether it's healing, whether I'm in the one in pain, whether I'm interceding for someone else, whatever that thing is, I want to remember and trust, right? Yet at the same time, there's this urgent need that I am experiencing that needs to be sorted, that I feel like, all of this is. But also I exist in a culture and in a faith where if I almost ask God why He's not showing up, like I'm not allowed to ask God why He's not showing up.
Because you are inherently supposed to
know that He's showing up. Like, so it's like He's there. So my prayer is almost to just confirm that He's actually there. So
to double down.
To kind of just like, so you find yourself, even by no fault of your own, caught in a very weird, and I guess that's what births this bypassing. It's like, okay, sour. God is here, God knows, God whatever, because it's just too complex and too much. Because for me to be in this moment and remember, and at the same time say, but I need it. I need you to show up for me. I need you to show up for me. I need to see that you are God. And I like how you said the last episode about like lamentation. People had so much, so much freedom to lament and to ask God difficult questions in a way that we have not been. We've not been given that. We don't have that permission to ask God why He's not here. Why is He not showing up right now? My child is dying. Like, why are you not showing up now? And this is the time that I need you. But I don't have that, asking that is almost blasphemous. So anyway, So I think all I'm saying is that I don't think it's anyone's even desire to bypass. It's almost created by how we have decided to, to express this.
That reminds me of, like, I have no idea how many times you hear that in a burial. Let us not ask God questions. God does what God wants, Of course, address the family and just thinking like, are you
insane?
Like this.
I think we should ban sermons at a funeral.
Those ones don't even come from a sermon.
They're not at the sermon.
Those are like the people who have come to comfort the mourners.
The sermons at a funeral are also terrible.
You have issues.
No. It's a sacrament. It's the final sacrament. We have to.
Can you stop?
It's a Catholic.
And can you stop attacking my work?
Let the pastor have it.
Let me have my day.
Ama mnataka AI akuje afanyie burial. Gosh.
Now we made my nose disappear. Oh no! Actually, I think it comes back to this idea that even as God reveals Himself, and I think that's a powerful word. Like He reveals it, like He allows us to know Him. This is what revelation is really. He reveals Himself. Like there's a way still, like we take that, like we don't ask why God shows up, kind of a thing. I mean, so sure, one of the things is to fix the needed thing here, But I think in a very good sense, God was always in the business of enticing us, inviting us to trust Him more, So which is the place for remembering, But then the way we frame God showing up is like, He shows up and He leaves us the way we were. Oh, thank you very much. The guy who just comes and sorts your money or whatever it is.
And then he goes.
Until next time, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But really, even this showing up, see whether it's the nation of Israel, it's like it's meant to build something within us and within the people. So that then, therefore, there's whatever that trust, increasing trust in God, I think in my sense would lead to a bit more maturer selves maturer versions of ourselves, So that then, when we face increasing challenging times, as it were, then we assume that we have built up the maturity muscle, A, to be present enough to remember, but two, not to be caught up with this thing of just grasping until the point where you're making a spiritually bypassing story, as it were, Now, of course, the fruit of that is we are not a people who generally mature just because God shows up to us, kind of thing. We're just glad He sorted the problem, and then still connected to the frustrating part of God, because there is genuinely frustrating part of God, His majesty, is what I think Richard Rowe argues, that God is also the great allower, the God who allows a lot of things, And because God allows so much of the things that we most likely wouldn't agree with, then the natural result should be lamenting, which in itself draws us back closer to God, But then lamenting assumes a sense again of maturity on our side that we don't usually have, So when God allows something and we don't even, again, have room to even question why He didn't show up, Now imagine we actually ask Him why, and then He tells us, actually, I allowed it, It's like it sneaked by me or I missed it. I allowed you to be sacked from your place of work. It's like, wait. Then the question becomes, okay, what good are you in it at this point? You know what I mean? But that then goes to the idea that we started by saying that the image we create of God makes us what destroys us, So you can make an image of a God whose primary job is to protect us from the suffering and the pain of the world. And then this God continually becomes frustrating. He shows up in some places, some other places He allows. And in a very real sense, assumes that through both experiences, either by showing up and by allowing for pain to happen, they both lead us to Him. So to the degree that God set such a high bar, I think we'll keep doing spiritual bypassing in some very real way. You know what I mean? Should have grace on those people.
Back
even at the values.
Back to the image of God, and of course the name of this podcast is Reimagine. So, how can we reimagine a God who energizes us to this life that is filled with so much beauty and also so much pain?
Yep. That's great.
For me, again, I'll go back to this idea of expanding the containers in which we have put God in. I think the more we expand the container, the more we can be present to the moments of our lives, to experience God, to lament about God, and all of those things, to name Him, how He has shown up in our different seasons, and to name the seasons that we are in. I think that can be helpful. The other thing is, again, back to lamenting, because I feel like we need God more when we are lamenting. Just building that culture of, I can come here and cry out as much as possible, rebuke Him as much as you want, and all of that, and just allow yourself, the grace to be.
I think for me, I hold on to two things. One of them is a metaphor, and one of the metaphors that things have developed over the years is an understanding of God as the ground of our being, right? And I love that idea of God as the ground of being, meaning that wherever I step in, I'm stepping somewhat on God or with God or one of those things, So which then releases me from the pressure of thinking that there's somewhere I am that God isn't, that then I have to do all sorts of gymnastics to sort of get in there. Right? So then
we welcome your presence to this.
More like we become aware.
So that idea of becoming aware, but it's just not like the ritual grounds, but also it's like the most grounding thing I have going with me is that there's a God with me, and that connects very quickly to the next big thing, which is Jesus comes to the world as Emmanuel, God with us. And I'm like, for me, that idea of God with us blows my mind away, So this idea that the deepest grounding for me is the sense of God with me. That is not an earned possession, it just is as a created being in that sense. Which then frees me to say I'm not constantly walking in and out of God's sight and love and all those different things, And that when I'm very fully aware of that, even within the particular moments, or even the moments when I'm like really doing stupid things, I still have this sense of like, not God the punisher, but more like the God who is with me, grieving with me as I do these really truly hurtful things, This is a whole different posture than just a God who is away out there waiting for me to come and present myself about all my sins that I had. So,
being shown on a screen
exactly.
for all of us to
For the rest of the people
So
to see,
weird.
So yeah, God is the ground of being and God with us. Those two things are what carry me in the reimagination world.
I think for me it's God as love, and just truly living into what what love would look like. What someone who loves me, who even I would go as far as saying likes me, who delights in me. It says so in the Bible.
Yeah.
Delight is like more related to even like than love. Like basically. But not in the wow studio audience. I know it's the season finale, but anyway, but not in that way of like we are like constantly that thing for like constantly talking to each other.
Yeah.
I just don't get it. I think I more relate to it as this thing that's carrying me, and for me it's God as love, and God being love for me is like such a powerful thing. Because I feel like love is one of the most transformative things we have.
Yeah.
And even when I think about my own life and my own story, the times that have truly transformed me have been moments of love where I have felt like I am loved, truly loved and cherished,
Yeah.
I'm not merely tolerated or whatever. It's just like you're loved. So for me that's a very central definition of God. The other thing for me is that, that just as I can be, God also can be. And as however He chooses in His, what I want to trust is infinite wisdom to show up in my life, I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
I might struggle with the outcomes, but I have moved beyond that point of struggling now with who God is. Like my struggle is with, but then why is this where I am? Why am I here?
Yeah.
What is this outcome? It's just making me feel paragasha, I don't want to feel like this, So that's my struggle. I feel like my journey of faith has moved me beyond I don't even engage anymore with like, is God there? But it's just like, just chill, please. It's okay.
Yeah, chill.
It's fine. It's that resting in God just is.
Yeah.
Just as I am, God just is,
So before Nash gives us our benediction for this week,
for the season, it's the benediction for the season. Please.
Why would this be pressure?
This other quote just sort of sums up everything that we seem to be saying here. And again, this podcast should have probably been called quotes from our favorite people.
We're evolving.
So we encounter God not in the heavens, but in the here and now, through our own circumstances, our own ups and downs, through our own stories. Wow,
that's Bible.
Ooh.
I'll come you up. got Richard, we got Robert, and they're doing very well.
Rachel Evans, Barbara Brown Taylor, the greats of this season.
Desmond Tutu.
Oh, Desmond Tutu made a cameo. Fantastic. Yeah.
We haven't done. We did Nadia.
We did not. Did we do Nadia? Oh, I mean, she's been mentioned in the conversation. Yeah.
She's like gotten the prime position.
Next season when we reimagine.
Nadia, do not worry. We haven't forgotten you. So for this blessing, which I feel like almost touches at the heart of what we long most for about this podcast, in the midst of all the meanderings and the deep dives, as it were. And we start with Rachel Held Evans' quote, refrain quote, which says, literally, dignified or not, believe it or not, ours is a God perpetually unabandoned me, doing everything it takes to convince even you that you are seen and you are loved. And that wherever you are in your relationship with God, in your relationship with His loving, merciful, compassionate God, may you remember that He will never forsake you, even when sometimes it feels like He has, and that He will always be God with you. And may you hear His voice saying to you, I love you, I love you, I created you for love and with love, grace and peace.
Amen.